It is a real pleasure to be joined by somebody I've known for a long time, that I have a great deal of admiration for. We live in an era where there has been a profound, and I mean profound, collapse of trust between the American people and institutions. And that crisis of character is not something that ever caught up to the person I'm real privileged to be able to be with this afternoon. That's Terry Moran, journalist, ABC newsman, when those words meant something, and there were inviolate standards, and we'll talk about some of that today. I've worked with Terry over my political career. I have no idea where Terry's politics ever were. You could hold a gun to my head. Didn't know he was an objective, fair, straight shooting reporter. And so we're privileged to have him with us. You can find Terry on his Substack. Type in Terry Moran. It's growing fast. It's a great read. And it's good to see Terry out there. Terry, I just wanted to ask you today that there will be a large cohort of this audience that remembers Peter Jennings. Mm-hmm. Take us inside the room to the best of your ability, imagining Peter Jennings was still with us today, and you watched what unfolded on television with the President of the United States flanked by the Attorney General of the United States, by the Defense Secretary of the United States. And you have to get ready for an evening newscast that's going to try to explicate this to the American people. And, we're back in the day where there's serious people sitting around the table who take their obligations and their duty very, very, very seriously. And I'm just, take us into the room, imagining Peter Jennings has just walked into the room as the managing director of World News Tonight. You guys got to get ready for the broadcast after watching that. What did we see today?
Wow, that is such a great invitation because I love Peter Jennings. He was a mentor to me in many ways, as he was to many people. An interesting man, a curious man, and the thing that he brought to the coverage, Steve, day after day, and he got in trouble for it, good trouble, as they say, was values. If he felt something was wrong, he didn't stand up and write an editorial about it, but he wanted to tell the truth about what he saw. And I'll give you a very good example. So I was a rookie White House correspondent when George W. Bush came into office. And, 9/11 happened, the response to the country, and then the administration started planning an invasion of Iraq on the basis of weapons of mass destruction. I talked to people all across the government and outside of our government and other governments. People in the Israeli government, people in the British government, in the intelligence, people at the UN, former weapons inspectors, all kinds of people on the Hill. There were only two people who said, "No, Saddam Hussein does not have any weapons of mass destruction." One was that guy Scott Ritter, who was he was a weapons inspector, kind of compromised. He was cozying up to Saddam and Tariq Aziz. It was a little, the foreign minister, it was a little weird. But the other one was Peter Jennings. And I remember I got out of having an editorial meeting with him, and I'd gotten out of a briefing that the White House was giving. And Peter said, Terry, I'm looking at these scientists who are coming out. He'd lived in the Middle East for 11 years, covered the region extensively, and had a feel for it, right? I don't think they have it, that he has any weapons of mass destruction. I said, Peter, I'm in the White House. I just talked to Condoleezza Rice. I know what I'm talking about. I'm the reporter here. It was a lesson and one that a burden that I carry in some ways. I could have done a better job. I understood diplomacy in some ways, and I kept challenging Bush on why are you abandoning our allies? Why are you going it alone? This is a major enterprise. But I didn't have an experience in the classified intelligence kind of stuff. And it was Peter's feel for it, and he wasn't afraid to say it, and he made my pieces better than they would have been by injecting that understanding he had, being unafraid in front of 70% of the country was in favor of that invasion. I'm not saying Peter was in favor of it or not. He just had a sense that truth mattered and that you had to bring your own understanding based on your reporting and on your values. That tone, that language is gone today. The network news, corporate news, legacy news, whatever you want to call it, they're afraid of that kind of language today. They don't use it. It's become more simplified. There are hardly any verbs anymore. Everybody's always saying, today, the president talking about, well, it's nighttime. My favorite example of that is when Elizabeth Taylor died, the headline was, tonight, Elizabeth Taylor died. I was like, no, she did that already. So the language has been dumbed down, which is to urgency, the terror of the past tense, I call it. But then I think the other thing that happened is that the retreat from values. Try to tell the story, one side, the other side, and all that without any sense of the actual truthful values that are at stake. And I think that's partly the influence of the corporation that doesn't want to rock the boat. And I'm just talking about Disney. I'm not talking about anything internal. I'm talking about obviously what we can all witness. And my understanding in general is, from my experience, the corporation certainly doesn't want that. And it also is a moment that is too big for that model. My friends and colleagues whom I respect tremendously, they still do great work. I look at ABC News every day. I got no hard feelings, genuinely. It's their business. It's their, they can do what they want. I crossed a line they didn't like, whatever. But they aren't meeting the moment. They're one of our many institutions that are failing to tell the truth to themselves in the first instance. Or maybe they are behind closed doors about what is happening, what is clearly happening in our country. And that model, which is imposed to some extent by corporate interests, can't tell the truth as in full as it is to the American people. And I think that's one of the many reasons why that's a very difficult business to be in right now.
What's happened today? What did you witness Trump do today?
Well, this was the theater of authoritarianism and the reality of it, right? This is the kind of thing that you'd see in South America in the 1950s, or, it's the Orban playbook, the Polish playbook. This is put troops on the streets, even if they aren't really needed. He did that in L.A. The riots out of control of L.A. In L.A., they kept showing the same one car burning. The police in L.A. are pretty good. They were on top of it. There were protesters, legit, peaceful, some getting out of control. No sign that the local authorities were unable to deal with that, but he wanted the troops on the street. He wanted you to feel that. And I'm talking to friends around here who live in D.C. I live out in Frederick, Maryland, and he wants them to feel it. He wants people to feel the exercise of his domination on their streets and on the streets of somebody else's city. So you don't want to, you don't want to get too out of the lane that you're supposed to be in your own city. And don't think that's not working. It is working. I was a foreign correspondent for 5 years, and I was in London one night waiting for the evening news, the Peter Jennings news, although he was gone by then, which comes out at 12:30 in the morning in London. So I'm there with my producer from Poland, Tomek Rolski, great guy. And they were in the throes of that government in Poland, the Law and Justice Party, which did something very similar from what we're enduring now. And they had just stripped the judiciary of authority, that kind of thing. And I said to Tomek, what's it like to live there? Just what's it like for people who aren't in agreement with the government? And he said something that has come back to me a lot these days. He said, your life gets smaller. You try not to look around. You try not to stand up. Your life gets smaller. That's what Trump wants. What we saw today was a performance of authority backed up now by presidential powers that nobody's going to stop him from using, not Congress, not the courts, in order to dominate opposition. And it's also on an issue, that a lot of ordinary Americans are only glancing at the news, a little bit every day, say, well, okay, yeah, I guess DC's full of crime, go get him. He's not stupid.
You lost your job at ABC News for offering an assessment about Stephen Miller. And you were gone within 48 hours. And I have been really looking forward to talking to you about it, particularly with the passage of some time, right, out of the moment where I think you can objectively analyze some of this a little bit better. Do you remember exactly what you said about him?
I mean, not word for word, but I remember writing. I mean, I was of sound mind and body, so I certainly remember writing it. And I remember that I thought before I sent it, I thought, this is pretty hot. This is tough. But I looked at it before I sent it and I thought, that's a description. I knew people would not like it within and without ABC News, but I thought, I'm describing something, and I believe that I was describing it accurately and fairly. I do remember I called him a world-class hater, which he is. I'd been thinking about it all day that day. Something about the manner in which his public persona was just bludgeoning the body politic every day, almost with lies and kind of spitting venom, and it's designed.
Let me ask this question, right? Would there have been an objection if you described David Duke as a world-class hater?
That's a great question. Probably. I might have had a minor reprimand. I would not have lost my job, but I might have had a reprimand.
Is there such a thing as a world-class hater? Do you think that that's a fair description, that there are people that for whatever reason burn with a deep hatred, that just objectively those human beings have existed over the course of history?
Sure. I mean, as a reporter, I look at the way Stephen Miller addresses the public, the way he fills the airwaves with lies and with this intense, almost desire to enrage and to humiliate. He almost spits out his words. I mean, how would you describe that? That's hatred. Trump too. More gleefully.
I think about your description and the consequence of it through a very singular prism. There's only one person I think about, and in the moment that it happened, it was a man named Avner Less. And Avner Less was a German Jew who became an Israeli police captain, and he was the singular person who interrogated Adolf Eichmann, which he did for 275 hours. And he never talked about it. He lied to his bosses about his family because he wanted the shot to interrogate him and knew he was up for it, and wouldn't get it if his bosses in Israel knew that he was in fact a survivor, and had lost his family. So however he obscured that, he did. And he's asked about the experience in 1981, so 20 years later. And he said, "Did you have any takeaways from that?" And he says, "Absolutely. He gave me my full faith in democracy, because there are Adolf Eichmanns everywhere. They're all around us. He said, but they're harmless in a democracy. But they turn deadly in an instant in a dictatorship." And what Stephen Miller is a little Eichmann, and he would have been understood as a little Eichmann contemporaneous to when that term was familiarized and popularized in the 1960s. And so if you eradicate objectively, right, as a news organization, right, the ability to describe someone accurately, precisely, surgically, then what you do is remove at a foundational level the keys to understanding someone like a Reinhard Heydrich, someone like a Joseph Goebbels, and you really censor historically by removing from consideration the role that this hatred had in the events that transpired when the personality disorder came into contact with immense political power. And so if you can objectively look at, say, Pope Francis and say that this is a person who advocated for love in the world, and also appreciate that there are doctrinal differences in a 2,000-year-old church if you're covering it through that prism. But objectively, what did he stand for? He stood for these values. And are there antithetical values to that? And I would argue that there are. And are they represented, right, by vices? And among those vices, are there such things as bigotry? Are there such things as hatred? Are there such things as cruelty? And there are all of those things, and they are really the singular lessons of the 20th century. And to watch you lose a pristine journalism career for the precise description of such things 6 months in to an autocratic travesty was quite a jarring moment in all of it. But the one thing that no one will ever be able to say about you is that you lost your integrity with so many others along the road over these many years. So good for you.
Yeah, Steve, thank you on many counts there. First, you helped me. You helped me understand sort of why I did it. I can tell you the feelings, but I think the language was necessary to accurately describe what was in front of me. And the way you just put it is really helpful to understand that. We must use the language of values in covering the world, because the world is made up of that, of right and wrong, of love and hate. And if you can't, as a journalist, describe and perceive those values at work, good and evil, then you aren't really doing your job. You're collecting a paycheck, and it was a pretty good one, but you aren't really doing your job. And then the other, I also thank you for the compliment. It's if people sometimes come up to me now and say, "Oh, thanks for your courage." I'm like, "Well, I just got fired." I mean, but I do understand sort of what they said. My wife, my dear wife, Johanna, we are 10 years married now. Closer to 20 years together, but 10 years married. And she said the night we told the kids, I got 3 kids, she said, often when people get fired, it's because of something shameful that they did. And Daddy got fired for telling the truth. And which meant a great deal to me that she said that and that the kids heard it. And it's one of the reasons that I am as upbeat. Look, I have a very daunting personal challenge ahead of me. And I'd love some tips from you as how you, with more experience in these new media spaces, which are exciting, which definitely are the media of tomorrow, the news communities rather than news networks, corporate networks. But I'm upbeat about it because I don't think I did anything wrong. And as I said, I'm not bitter about it. It's their company, it's their policies. Fair enough. I am who I am, and I remain that way, and fare forward that way. And that's what I'm going to do.
When you look at what happened today, what I see is I see a couple of things. The first thing I see is you described it perfectly, is the autocratic theater. And if you're of a certain age and you grew up in the place that I grew up with, which northern New Jersey, with Donald Trump in the frontal lobe, right? Since I was 9 years old, everybody knows that person. I was talking about this on a podcast earlier, that if you say, "Hey, we're going to the beach," they're like, "Yeah, not me, sharks." Right? Or like, "Yeah, I'm going on a vacation to Montana." Or like, "Yeah, I won't go there, bears." Right? That they have some right? Fear, right? That's completely unnatural. And you can go back 40 years. Donald Trump's fear, right? That his boogeyman, right, is the Central Park Five, right? He is afraid of Black teenagers, right? To him, this is the lion amidst the savanna grasses, right? This is the great predator in America. And you can look back 40 years to his call for the death penalty of the Central Park Five, all the racial animus, all the racial bigotry, never miss an opportunity, right, to pile on, to make a declaration, to use force. And so you have this spectacle today like this, right? And I don't know how you detach these two things, is that the executive action, right, which is that we must assert these powers now. And these powers, and you can tell me if you think I'm overstating it, but I think functionally he rescinded home rule today, right, which he has the authority to do, basically.
He's going to have to have the prostrate Congress pass a law, but yeah,
right.
We're on that path.
Right. And so he has taken power from a majority Black city, neutered their elected officials, really stripped them as a fundamental right of citizenship, has pointed and stigmatized them as criminals, right? A city of criminals. He's cleaning up the slums. He's given license to the federal agents to do whatever they want to whomever they want, to beat anyone they want. He made that clear. And all of the homeless people are going to be shipped away somewhere, quote, far away. And that's the news conference. That's the announcement. He's got the Attorney General, who's covering up the Epstein situation and will be a party to the pardoning of Ghislaine Maxwell, standing on his left. He's got the Defense Secretary standing on his right, who's saying he's ready to deploy the armed forces into all the American cities where there's disorder and chaos. And it's some hours later, and I don't see really any type of what I would assess as coherent response, right, from the opposition party, right, like at a national level. And so what like, how do you account for the lackadaisicalness, the lack of urgency, the lack of ability to speak out and denounce this in a way that connects with people across the country? Why? Like, I saw someone who was incoherent and deranged today. Why does he have Democrats on their back foot?
Yeah, that is a great question. Also, I'm glad you went there on the question of race, because, for a long time in my life, my now long life, if you were a racist, you were ashamed to say so, right? And now they're all out in public. They found each other online. It's pretty ridiculous. The problem now is if you want to call out what is actually factually racism in front of you, you're afraid to do it because everybody says, you're dragging up the boogeyman of race again. And I think you're absolutely right. You hear the way he talks about this slums, this dirty city, get these guys out of here, get rough. And you can hear the animus in there. As for the Democrats, they lost their working class roots. You know this better than I, right? How many of those leaders actually seem to have a stake in these things? And they're getting funded by people who don't. That's too much. Obviously, I think there's some really great Democratic emerging leaders, from Jasmine Crockett to John Ossoff. I think AOC remains a compelling figure, but the actual leadership seems still stuck in the 90s almost in terms of their model of rhetoric and how they view the issues. And now they're kind of trapped by being too tethered to the professional classes. You need some kind of brawlers in there. You need people who didn't, go to the right college. They weren't in the front row with their hand up getting the A every time. But they're right. They're right about things, and they know it and they live it. And you have some people like that. But it is dismaying that the Democratic Party seems unable to find that voice. Cory Booker speaking for 25 hours or whatever it was, I don't remember it, is a nice try. But in order to do what? Now, they don't have power, and the Republicans aren't going to give them power. But I think this is going to be something I think this is the set piece for a longer display of force in the cities. And I expect that to come around the midterms. I think we're going to get accustomed to seeing troops on the streets of our cities. He'll cook up some emergency around the election, and there will be troops monitoring the election. I think that's a worst case scenario, but I don't think it's out of the possibility. Democrats, how are they going to stand up to that? When they march, they'll be confronted with another emergency order that'll bring the authoritarian heel down even harder on them. I think the model for resistance for me right now is what we're seeing that's really changing hearts and minds on the immigration authoritarianism, right? The ripping of children from schoolrooms and women from their kids out of their cars and all the rest of it. And that's citizen journalism. I'm looking at my phone. So it's people doing that, confronting the authoritarianism and putting it out instantly into the world where it gets picked up. And you hear people like Joe Rogan, you hear neighbors of mine, I live in kind of a purple district, who didn't really sign up for that level of brutality. Dairy farmers, I'm open to go out and talk to dairy farmers who certainly voted for Trump in big numbers, but now are without workers. It is connecting with people like that, and more than anything, standing up, not in a protest necessarily. Protests are fine. They raise awareness. They forge solidarity. But at the end of the day, they don't do much. You put pictures out. We go to where the troops are, or whatever. We put our bodies out there with our own cameras and record what's happening. There's a better chance of mobilizing the great muddled middle of America, which is still there. It's important to remember what we saw in the Oval Office today is not really what most Americans voted for. I'm convinced of that. Trump is underwater still because most Americans want what they've always wanted, a pragmatic way of making life better. Not a theater of authoritarianism, not boots on the ground to terrorize Black people. They want problems fixed. And crime is a problem in many places. I don't think Democrats should undersell that. But it's more affordability. And he's making that worse. And there's openings for Democrats. I don't see him taking it because it doesn't feel like they're connected to normal people, ordinary people, as much as they used to be. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it feels like they're at one remove and like they're reading a script as how to connect with you rather than connecting with you. I mean, look, Gavin Newsom, who I talked to, is I think turned a page and is trying really hard to shed some of the slick politician that he does so well and find himself and find solidarity with other people. Is that going to be enough? I don't know. I think there's some really good Democrats out there. Are they in Congress? Some of them, but not that many. That's my own. You're a much more astute political mind than I am. What is wrong with the Democrats?
I don't know, but like the most obvious thing in the world to me is something we don't talk about at all, which is Zohran Mamdani and Trump beat the same guys.
Huh. That's well put. Yeah.
And, the American people have made a judgment, and you're not seeing any elasticity in the numbers, right? With the Democratic Party, right? So at some level, you're witnessing a game of chicken, right? And I have a Republican friend in New York, and he's like Zorhan, right? He's like, I'm voting for Zorhan. He's like, you give me the choice, right? Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams and Zorhan. He goes, I got Zorhan. He goes into the fucking ground. He's like, I'm just sick of it, right? So he's like in a category of voters that the Democratic establishment plays chicken with, right? That they say, well, you're going to abide in Eric Adams, you're going to tolerate a Cuomo, right? We're gonna let you, we're going to tell you that, right? It's either, these guys, or there's going to be a crisis, right? Democracy's going to be in trouble, or this, or whatever. And people are just sick of it, right? Calling bullshit out of it. And I think the Chuck Schumer thing is a big deal. Like, you talked about kind of common sense, right? You're in a crisis, you're in trouble, right? We're in a proverbial plane crash in the middle of the Alaskan bush, right? We gotta hike out of the wilderness. And if we gotta hike out of the wilderness, right? On what planet is the guy at the front of the column, Chuck Schumer, right? And I think that's a huge issue for the Democratic senators. And he's running for re-election. He's running for re-election as the Senate leader, and there has to be fresh faces forward who can go out and I think talk about some of the ephemeral comments. I mean, I think I just saw one of the comments there. Stop vilifying Democrats, right? There is a culture of fanboy and fangirlism, right? Where you have two reciprocal cults, right? Where no Hatfield will dare speak badly about a Hatfield, and no McCoy about a McCoy. And the problem with it for Democrats, right, is that they're the weaker party, right? And the weaker party never loses to the stronger party, right? And so what the Democratic Party has to become is a strong party. And the way it becomes a strong party is by being the American party against an un-American party, right? That's the identity that the Democratic Party has to espouse, is an American identity, right? And to say that the American identity is open to all people. We believe in equality for all people, right? And that whether you're black, brown, white, whatever, is an American, right? We believe in a creed. And that creed is that we're all created equally. And this is what we have to be able to put into competition against an idea that holds that Donald Trump is the law. Donald Trump decides who's above the law, who's below the law, who gets to make money, who doesn't get to make money, who gets to have an opinion, who doesn't get to have an opinion. And I would just say that anytime you see a person like the nutty pastor of Pete Hegseth go out and start doing CNN interviews, you got to think, like, why is now the time to start surfacing, right, my belief that women should lose their right to vote, and that slavery was a good thing and the black people enjoyed it and the white slave master was benevolent and kind and the patriarchy worked, and so on and so forth. And Churchill was the villain and Hitler was misunderstood, and so on and so forth. And look, all of these things are connected, and all of these things are worrying, and all of these things demand people to be really alert and to wake up, right? And when people kind of reflexively say, they say this institution that lost an election to Donald Trump, right? That's how fucked up it is, right? It lost 2 elections to Donald Trump. I lost an election, for a guy to Barack Obama, right? Big difference. Right. But you lose 2 elections to Donald Trump, and we face a political position in the country now where Trump is growing more unpopular by the day, but more powerful by the hour. And that has to be arrested. It has to be challenged. And John Kennedy spoke to this. He said, what is the purpose of a political party if it's not to serve a national purpose? The purpose of the Democratic Party can't be the vehicle for the power of like Amy Klobuchar and Chuck Schumer, right? And I'm not trying to disparage them in any way, other than to say the purpose of the Democratic Party isn't a vehicle for individual ambition. It must be the vehicle for the defense of the country against the fascist cause. And that is the essential challenge for Democrats right now to rise up, put the country in an American identity for foursquare at the center of the party's brand. And I think that'll work. But they're not there yet.
They're not there by a long shot. And I think you're exactly right. This is a moment where I kind of, in your description of Schumer and Klobuchar, two things occur to me. First, the next Democratic Party is going to be the people that rebel against this Democratic Party. They got to take it. Yeah, they have to throw it. They have to, like Mamdani, right? They're going to have to overthrow the establishment. And the second thing is because that establishment, the way you describe it, it reminds me of ABC News and of the other network news media that I was part of for so long. And in this way, that language, that way of doing business doesn't work. The times have changed. You're not meeting the moment because you aren't able to, given the preconceptions that you have, given how you do business. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. The world has changed. Change with it. And I think that's what people want to see from the Democrats. I do think they have a great heritage and a great message, the patriotic one that you just outlined. The Democrats have, my entire life, stood for the people, all of the people, without embarrassment. And second, I think the other thing is that they have lying on the table there, the populist economic message that I think people still want seen put into action. Donald Trump is cutting taxes for the wealthiest people in America, and he's cutting health care for the people who need it most. If you can't win an election based on it, I don't know what the matter is. And there's this incredible concentration of wealth at the top, which everybody knows is a huge problem. And the Democrats have a solution on the table in some ways. It is what Senator Elizabeth Warren calls the ultra millionaires tax. She's got to get with the era of Trump. It's the filthy rich people tax, right? I mean, a wealth tax might be complicated, might be unconstitutional. Well, 100 and some years ago, we rose up as one people when there was an illegitimate concentration of wealth crushing the hopes of so many people and passed a constitutional amendment together. And if you put that kind of thing before the American people or policies in that direction, Bernie Sanders shows it. Trump was more afraid of Bernie Sanders, aside from the socialist label, than he was of anybody else because he understands. That's where the votes are. People want change. They want change to make life better for them, to make the opportunities real, and to bring the high and mighty down a bit. This is America. We don't have some tech oligarchy. We shouldn't, at any rate, who kind of pay to play. Look at the deal NVIDIA just made, that is distorting our democracy. We're the United States, and people should be able to rise and not be blocked by people who have illegitimate power that they're basically purchasing now from the federal government. And I think that's the next Democratic Party, whether they like it or not. They're going to find people who do that, and they're going to win.
I think that a huge part of the future message is about confronting power and taking it away from the accumulation of some of the most powerful interests in American history. And that means very specifically from the office of president. It means reestablishing the co-equality of the Congress. It means reestablishing the checks and balances. It means putting a check on the tech companies. But the accumulation of power through big institutions, all of it starts, I think, with an embrace of fundamental ethics reform, campaign finance reform, and some big structural reforms that the Democratic Party should embrace at a return to roots level, so we can go out and talk about the type of serfdom that too many people live under. 40% of the country has $400 cash available. And, these are the people that are dealing with 30% credit card rates. Their life and opportunity is defined by an invisible algorithm, a credit score, right? Every major bank is bailed out. They're in debt up to their eyeballs. We have loaded the young people up with debt. Their degrees are meaningless. So we have not created the conditions of opportunity. And I say this to candidates all the time, when I talk about, talk about a race to them, when people call, and I make the point, I say, have you ever been on a ladder? And every person I've ever asked that question says yes. And I said, well, when you're climbing the ladder, what direction are you looking? And, everyone pauses and they say up. And I go, well, when you stop climbing the ladder, right, where people start looking, they start looking down. Right. And if you're stuck on the middle of that ladder and you're no longer looking up and you're looking down, what you become concerned about is someone trying to pull you down off that ladder, right, coming up from behind you. And that is fundamentally the story of American immigration, is that when we have declining opportunity, you have rising anti-immigration sentiment. And the accumulation of a lot of different factors have created the opportunities for the demagoguery we've seen. But when you look at the fact that ICE is the 15th largest military in the world now, we got masked guys running around the country that with the bonuses, every whack job deputy sheriff and bad cop is gonna wind up being a federal agent, right? They're gonna be shed from their police forces, right? Every loser in every police force is gonna get the pat on the back. It'd be like you make a great ICE agent talk, right? That's just human nature. Get them off, right, the force, and get these guys over there. And the if you had a bet on it, like the American people, right, they're going to tolerate it, right? The masked guys and the militarized cities. Where's that go?
I don't think that's us, and I don't think we've changed.
Yeah,
I think there is a mass movement like none I've seen in my lifetime. I don't think there's been one in the country's history. Tens of millions of Americans will follow this authoritarian personality to the ends of the earth, and they get a kick out of it. The trolls are delighted. This is a government of trolls with power to impose their hatreds and their inadequacies on the country. But most people are still normal. I believe this, truly. The best kept secret in American life. Most people are still normal. They are not for cruelty. They don't get giddy and gleeful at some woman being dragged away from her children. Nobody. We're decent people. Americans are still a middle of the road, middle class, middle temperament people. We are not zealots. We are not ideologues. We like what works. Still, they have been persuaded by hucksterism and by the lack of an effective democratic response that Trump is going to make things better pragmatically. Now, his base, which is tens of millions strong, they'll follow him to his program of authoritarianism, no question about it. But if it results in wrecking opportunity, in stagflation, in the kind of economic misery that could well come because of what he's doing, and the weakening of America around the world, then they won't win. They won't win. And I don't think they win on the national character either. We don't like to think of ourselves as the bad guys. Yes, we failed at living up to our ideals, but they're still our ideals. And I think trashing them, well, he makes a big point of kissing the flag and all that. It's all BS. What is real is that we're a decent people. And as his government makes us different in the eyes of the world and increasingly in the eyes of Americans, I don't think they're going to win. That's why I don't think he wants to face true and fair elections, because it's not a majority.
How much rope do you think he has? How much time, right, that the American people indulge this?
Well, I saw that the price of some groceries is going to go up 40% under these tariffs because we get so much food for overseas. I think that'll do it. I think the inflation, the decline, the job numbers are terrible. I think the economy, people want a better life, and he's giving them a worse one. They aren't quite feeling it yet. And then they're going to go around with this cartoon dime store fascism that is on display. I think that everything will look differently if he is seen, as I believe he is, to be incompetent when it comes to the economy. He's a businessman really only in reality TV. And I think that is going to be his downfall. What he's doing to the budget, what he's doing to the economy, what he's doing to the world economy, what he's doing to the American reputation in the world. I mean, they aren't buying a drop of bourbon in Canada, right? That is, you see across the world, other nations making other arrangements.
I was in a LCBO in Toronto yesterday, and there is not a drop of fucking American liquor in it. Not a drop. Not a
They're
drop.
angry. They're angry.
Oh, yes, they are.
And more than angry, they're doing something that will take a toll for years to come. They are making different arrangements. Right now, after 40 years, Trump is drawing down the reservoir of goodwill and good trade with the world that the world counted on. And so countries around the world embedded themselves with the American economy, understanding that there might be a little bit of change of direction this way and that way. But he's vandalizing the entire system, and it's damaging them to their core. And they are not going to be so dependent on the American economy. Again, Brazil is now buying all its oil in Chinese currency. They're trying to de-dollar their economy as much as they can. That's going to be happening around the world. Canada even is deciding to make closer trade arrangements with Europe than with the United States. He's got a few years of that. He may, not last that long, just given the actuarial tables. But he's definitely, these policies are going to make Americans poor and unhappier. And I know that because I covered Brexit. Brexit was the same kind of spasm of emotional vengeance wreaked upon those front row kids, right? That had taken over their government and rendered them, irrelevant to their own self-governance in Britain. And they are making themselves poorer, and they are making themselves, the food is going to be worse. Because the only reason that made British food better was joining the EU and getting all that Spanish cheese and Italian ingredients without tariffs, without any impediment. As a result, Britain is feeling smaller in the world today, and the regret in Britain about Brexit is huge, and was pretty early on. I think we're gonna have much more regret when we see that people will not want to engage and trade with us at the same level for this foreseeable future, and that will make our lives poorer.
How do you process the stories that are accumulating at a frightful pace about human rights abuses by U.S. government personnel in these private prisons, in these detention facilities, where through arrogance or stupidity, you have a group of people who've decided apparently they can do whatever it is they wish to do to other human beings without having to worry about accountability, which is definitely not going to be the case. But when you read about people drinking out of toilets, children sleeping on concrete floors, how do you account for the lack of meaningful, what I would describe as meaningful denunciation in the public square at full volume? Is it that the media has an allergy to covering it vividly? Is it that elite institutions are intimidated? Is it that there's a collapse of moral authority generally in civil society? How do you account for that? Or is it simply the case that the issue isn't severe enough yet?
Yeah,
Right?
that's a good question.
It's not hot enough yet.
Maybe. I think it is. And what I flashed to, once again, look, I had a great career at ABC News. The people were there doing good work under difficult conditions as best they can. That said, they are failing there and across legacy media, which still has such a big influence. It's hard to get these stories, right? Actually, it's not that hard. You're seeing people with cell phones getting them every day. But getting into Alligator Alcatraz or getting to the site in Pennsylvania that they're building, this is when I miss the resources of a major corporate news network. You should be down there getting arrested, right? Or whatever, for at least make a noise. Like, this is happening in your name. You might not know about it, but there are these terrible conditions, people coming out, talk to the lawyers, all the rest of it. And I think you also need Congress. The institution is failing us. Even a little bit of oversight would help on that. But I do think that there's a reluctance. People have seen too much of it, right? The news is always new, and so is looking for the next bright, shiny thing. And yet this is a huge story. And I believe we are failing to cover it. All of us, if I could get down there, I would. I think that getting in good trouble might be necessary. And I think there's an allergy to that, right? The lawyers, I can't tell you any specifics, right? Because it's whatever. But over the course of my career, and I think across the networks, the corporate lawyers went from defending journalism to make journalism much more difficult to do. That the bottom line became not get this story out as best you can, but stop this story from hurting the corporation. And I absolutely am convinced that is a general statement as these corporations saw the disadvantages of owning news networks. And I do think at the end of the day, they won't. Trump has made it very difficult for them. They don't want to, now ABC is a tiny, tiny part of Disney. Did they want to have to worry about some schmuck like me giving them a headache with the president of the United States? They do not want to worry about that. Although I think what might have been a better play for them was to stand up and say, no, you can't. And then they'd get a lot of good publicity and all the rest of it. But their bottom line is what matters. So I don't think the lawyers are going to let you go get that story. I don't know that as any kind of confidential information, but my hunch is that the media is failing us. The establishment media is failing to cover this story in a way that grabs the attention of the American people and awakens their conscience. If I was trying to do anything, maybe I was trying to do that too. And that's that values-based journalism we were talking about that is so difficult to do in this moment, and that I think that the corporations that run the legacy news media are reluctant to engage with. They don't want the language of values to be part of the journalism.
Yeah, it's a astonishing moment. It truly is. As we watch all of this unfold. When you look out at Democrats, who do you see that you regard as that person has presidential timber? That person is rigged for this moment in the next, that they're going to be able to play at that level?
Well, there's no question that Gavin Newsom wants it, and that's a necessary thing to have. You got to want the job, and as you know, you got to have the hunger in your belly. He does, and I do see this shift in his. You can almost see it dawning on him. I need to be with the people in this way, not the way I have been. Right, that kind of slick. Looks like he was born slick. And he's trying to unslick himself. Can he? I don't know, but he certainly is somebody who is reaching for the moment. I don't know that being governor of California is that something that's going to appeal to a lot of people. I don't know. Aside from him, on the other end of the spectrum, I'm not sure he's in fact, I don't think he's presidential timber, but I'm very intrigued by the tone and the seriousness and the power and strength of John Ossoff, in a very quiet way that he has confronted Trump administration officials with surgical cross-examination that backs them down. I've liked that. That's not a presidential thing. Look, the bench turns out to be deep. There are a lot of people on it, most of them governors. I'd like to see what Gretchen Whitmer is made of right out there. You never know until they start clashing. This is Biden's great sin, right? Is that at Thanksgiving in 2023, somebody in his family didn't tell him, hey, you've done your best. Let's spend some time together now. And instead, he robbed the Democrats of having a primary where you would have had Newsom, Whitmer, Pritzker, Bashir, right across the board, slugging it out. And that's when you really see what people are made of. Who at the beginning of the Republican primaries, obviously Trump quickly dominated, but of the other mooks up there, who would have said at the beginning, the class of that field turned out to be Nikki Haley. She was the one who actually, you have to see them kind of in action. And the last thing I'll say is, I covered the collapse of the Baltimore Bridge and the recovery of the bodies and the rebuilding of it for weeks. And I got to know Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, pretty well. I was there at 4 a.m, the morning after it collapsed, and stayed there for a while. He is a very impressive man. He is a getter things doner. And I think one thing that you can never forget is the American people understand the presidency. It is an executive office. They want people who have a vision, can set an agenda, can marshal the resources of the country to execute on it. And he's that guy. I saw him do it with compassion and smarts and firmness to get that thing cleared out and get the channel open, the Port of Baltimore open, to do so with heart and to start work on a new bridge. I did see presidential timber in that way. He's a very impressive guy.
What do you see in a Pritzker? What do you see in a Bashir?
Well, I kind of love Pritzker's game. He's game for a rhetorical fight, and he's good at it. He's really good at it. I first kind of twigged to how good he was at that graduation speech he gave, which kind of went viral, where he says, if you don't follow idiots, right? That's one rule of life that he was giving the graduates. And he says, how do you know an idiot? Look for the cruel person in the room. That's the idiot. And I kind of loved that whole kind of brawling, ham-fisted Illinois politician. I grew up outside of Chicago, and kind of I like him, and I think he's ready for a fight. Now he's also a billionaire. He's very liberal on social issues in some ways to the left of Americans, but he's a skilled orator and can self-fund, I guess, which is also important. But I kind of like the fact that he's a happy warrior in the fight, and I think people appreciate that happy warrior. I describe myself as a Hubert Humphrey Democrat. Not quite sure what that means, except that I'm old. But he was a hero in my family. My mom remembered the 1948 Democratic Convention and the young mayor of Minneapolis, Hubert Humphrey, calling for civil rights, planking the platform, and she loved him. And he was a happy warrior. He hit the campaign trail with the same upbeat energy, without backing down, could fight for his people, could fight for his positions, with cheer, good cheer and bravery. And I think people respond to that. Pritzker has a little bit of that.
What about Bashir? Another young governor.
Young governor, obviously, he leads with his heart, it seems to me. Moderate. Maybe too moderate for where the country is. Like, we're in a fight. I don't like it. I'm a mod. I like to say I'm a member of the most despised tribe in American politics. I'm a proud centrist. But right now, this administration is giving you the opportunity to be moderate. You have got to stand up and say what is there factually in front of us, which is an attempt at authoritarian takeover of our system of government and a degrading of democratic opportunity within it. And if you can't say that, then I don't think you're going to win a Democratic primary. And Bashir, I think, while appeals to a lot of those people in the great muddled middle that still runs the country, I believe, the people that will go back and forth, and I'm not talking about the people who are self-declared independents. I'm talking about the people who steer the ship of state ultimately with their instincts. I think they want to see, they will want to see someone stand up to Trumpism with a stronger alternative than I feel from Bashir right now. People want to fight. They're right to want to fight. This needs to be fought against.
What a perfect place to leave it there. Veteran ABC newsman Terry Moran. And I use that designation with a lot of intent. You know, that was, you know, whether it's Frank Reynolds, whether it's a Peter Jennings, you know, the integrity of that institution, World News Tonight, and you honored and met it all the days that you worked there. And I know that as a longtime watcher, and I mean 54, I was watching ABC World News Tonight from age 6, right, all the way through. And you met the moment. You filled the highest ethical standards of a worthy and noble profession, and necessary one in a democracy. And you're doing great stuff in an independent media role, particularly when you're out there, you know, traveling around the country, meeting people. I hope you'll keep doing more of that. And what I'd say to everybody, you know, the almost 3,000 people, you know, who are with us this afternoon, you know, again, this is a very serious moment in this country's history. This is a very real crisis. What Donald Trump was talking about today is without precedent in the modern history of the country, and it's right to be alarmed about it. It is right to be disturbed about it. It's right to be talking about it tonight at the kitchen table, and it's also right to say to your neighbor and to your friend that I'm an American and I'm not going to stand for it and I'm going to do something about it, and to get engaged, get involved. Your rights do not come from MAGA. They do not come from Trump. They come from a higher place and a higher power. And never forget that. But with that, you would find Terry Moran on Substack. I urge you to do so. Subscribe to him there. Follow him there. I'm Steve Schmidt at The Warning, and thanks for joining this afternoon for another conversation. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Take care.
I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.